Late one chilly evening, the city was quieter than usual. The tall glass towers that normally sparkled with life stood dim, their reflections trembling in the light wind. Most people were already home, wrapped in comfort, unaware that something unexpected was happening beneath the surface of one of the city's largest new buildings. It was supposed to be a proud project, a state-of-the-art redevelopment site meant to open in just a few weeks. But tonight, trouble had arrived without warning. The owner of the project, a well-known billionaire who preferred to stay out of the spotlight, had come to the site earlier than planned. He wasn't the type to show up without reason. He was calm, private, and rarely emotional. But today, his face showed worry. The huge underground level of the building held a complex water pressure system that was crucial to the entire structure's safety. And for reasons no one could yet understand, that system was failing. When he first arrived, he saw workers gathered around a cluster of control panels, their expressions tight and confused. A dull alarm kept beeping in the background, low but steady, like a heartbeat speeding up. Something was wrong, and it was getting worse by the minute. The billionaire stepped closer, hands in his coat pockets, pretending to be calmer than he felt. "What's the situation now?" he asked one of the engineers. The engineer rubbed his forehead and stepped aside so the billionaire could see the control board. "Pressure keeps rising on line B. We already shut down the main pump, but something's blocking the secondary flow. If we can't redirect it soon, the lower level might start flooding." That single word echoed in the billionaire's mind. If water filled the underground floor, it wouldn't just damage the new electrical systems, it could set the project back months and cost millions to repair. And that was the best-case scenario. He looked around at the workers, their jackets still covered in dust and concrete powder. Some were crouched near the pipes, shining flashlights into the narrow spaces. Others were tightening bolts that didn't need tightening. Anything to avoid standing still and admitting defeat. One of the project managers approached him. "We've tried everything we could think of. We can't find the blockage. We don't even know what's causing the pressure spike. It just started." The billionaire didn't raise his voice. He never did. But his silence carried a weight everyone felt. Problems usually disappeared when he arrived. He had a reputation for making solutions appear from thin air. But right now, even he had no idea where to begin. He asked for a flashlight and crouched beside the main valve system. The metal was cold, the pipes trembling lightly under the pressure building inside them. He pressed his ear against one pipe, listening. The vibration was uneven, almost like something was rattling deep within it. "This isn't normal," he muttered. One engineer nodded quickly. "No, sir. It's not a typical mechanical failure. It's something deeper. Maybe a blockage or a trapped segment inside the release line." The billionaire stood up and sighed. He wasn't angry, just tired. He had poured a huge amount of money into this redevelopment project. Not because he needed more wealth, he already had more than enough, but because he wanted to build something meaningful for the city, something that would offer jobs, housing, and opportunities. And now, with only weeks to go before opening, the entire foundation was at risk. The manager approached him again. "Sir, if the pressure keeps rising, we might have to force a shutdown. It could take hours, maybe all night, and even then we might still face damage." The billionaire nodded slowly. His shoulders felt heavier than his tailored coat. He didn't mind hard work, but helplessness, true helplessness, was something he rarely faced. Tonight, it was unavoidable. The workers kept moving, tools clinking, boots scuffing across the floor. The air smelled faintly of metal and damp concrete. It was the kind of night that made everyone feel smaller than the buildings around them. At one point, the billionaire walked toward the temporary barriers near the entrance to take a moment alone. He looked at the ground, thinking through every possibility. He wasn't a plumber or an engineer, but he had learned enough from past projects to understand the basics. Yet, no matter how he replayed the issue in his mind, he reached the same conclusion: they were missing something. He closed his eyes and inhaled. The cold air burned slightly in his chest. He could hear the workers behind him, still arguing quietly about what to try next. Each voice carried frustration, Then something unusual caught his attention. A soft shuffle of steps coming from the far corner of the sidewalk just outside the barrier. He glanced up and saw a figure moving slowly toward the edge of the construction fence. It was a man, thin, wrapped in layers of worn clothing. His coat was old, the fabric frayed, the color faded so much it was hard to know what it used to be. A small blanket peeked out of his backpack. His shoes were mismatched, one slightly lifted at the heel, the other tied with a piece of cord. A homeless man. He wasn't bothering anyone. He wasn't asking for money or food. He simply stood near the warm exhaust vents that pushed heat from the building's temporary generators. That spot was known among a few of the city's homeless community. The warm air helped them get through harsh nights, and the construction crew had grown used to seeing one or two people around from time to time. But tonight, the billionaire saw him for the first time. Not the man himself, perhaps just the loneliness in his posture. The cold settling into his body. The long silence of someone who had grown used to being ignored. The homeless man watched the scene quietly, standing just far enough not to get in the way. His expression was soft but curious, as if he sensed something was happening below the surface. One of the guards noticed him and stepped forward. "Sir, you can't stand here. It's a work site." The homeless man nodded politely and took a step back but didn't fully leave. Instead, he tilted his head. Listening to the alarm that kept echoing from inside the building, the billionaire, still lost in thought, didn't pay much attention to the guard or the man. Instead, he went back inside, returning to the cluster of workers. "How long do we have before the lower pumps start failing?" he asked. "Maybe 20 minutes, the engineer replied. "The pressure is hitting the upper limit." That wasn't enough time for trial and error solutions. The billionaire looked at the pipes again, trying to calm his mind. He knew stress wouldn't help. Yet despite all the equipment, all the trained experts, all the technology around him, he felt strangely powerless. He had solved problems in companies across the world. He had turned failing businesses into successful ones. He had built hospitals, schools, housing projects. But this simple blockage inside a pipe was defeating him. He stepped back and ran a hand through his hair. The manager approached again, speaking cautiously. "Sir, maybe we should consider bringing in outside help, a specialist." "At this hour?" The billionaire asked. "Yes, it'll cost a lot, and it might take time for someone to arrive. But we don't have time," he said quietly. The room fell silent again. Then, for the first time all evening, the billionaire allowed his frustration to show. It appeared only for a few seconds, a crack in his calm, but everyone saw it. He turned toward the entrance again, needing air, needing distance. The cold night met him like a wall. He walked a few steps and leaned against the barrier, staring out at the quiet street. That's when he noticed the homeless man again. The man wasn't shivering. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't asking for anything. He simply stood there, looking thoughtful, almost like he was waiting for the right moment to speak up. The billionaire raised an eyebrow but dismissed the thought. He told himself it was just the stress playing tricks on him. But the homeless man stood still, eyes gently following the movements of the workers. He seemed to recognize the alarm sound, the pressure readings on the screens, the rhythm of how the system was failing. It was subtle, almost invisible. But the billionaire noticed. The man wasn't watching like a curious stranger. He was watching like someone who understood. Inside, the alarm kept echoing, growing sharper as the pressure climbed. The billionaire closed his eyes for a brief second, the weight of the situation pressing down like the cold around him. He didn't know it yet. But the turning point of the nighttime, perhaps of someone's entire life, was standing only a few steps away, and that man was about to say the words no one expected. "I know what to do." The alarm inside the building kept echoing, steady and stressful, like a reminder that time was slipping away. Workers hurried back and forth, their voices rising as they argued over what to try next. The cold night pressed against the open entrance, letting in the kind of air that made hands stiffen and tempers shorten. The billionaire stood near the doorway, trying to stay calm. But the worry in his eyes was beginning to show. He didn't like feeling helpless. He didn't like watching people who depended on him struggle without a solution. But tonight, all he could do was wait and hope that someone would notice something, anything, that could point them in the right direction. He looked back at the control board, then at the pipes, then at the workers. Nothing looked different from a few minutes ago, yet the danger kept growing. The pressure in the system climbed higher with every passing minute. The underground level was one mistake away from flooding. He stepped outside again, rubbing his hands together and breathing out slowly, watching his breath fog in the cold air. That's when he noticed the homeless man again. The man stood a few steps behind the temporary barrier, as though unsure if he should stay or leave. His face was calm, almost too calm for someone standing close to a chaotic construction site. There was a gentleness in his eyes, but also a quiet depth, like someone who had lived through more nights like this than he could count. The billionaire didn't know why, but he felt drawn to look at him again. Maybe it was the stillness the man carried. Maybe it was the way he didn't flinch at the alarm or the workers' loud voices. Or maybe it was because, in all the noise and stress, the man seemed like the only person who wasn't panicking. One of the security guards glanced at the billionaire and at the homeless man. "He's been around here before," the guard explained. "Doesn't cause trouble, just tries to stay warm near the vents." The billionaire nodded. "Let him be. It's a cold night." The guard stepped back, and for a moment, nothing happened. The billionaire turned toward the entrance again, ready to go back inside. But before he could take more than a few steps, he heard a quiet voice behind him. "Sir, I think I know what's wrong." The billionaire stopped walking. His breath paused in the air. He slowly turned around. The homeless man had stepped a little closer, still outside the barrier. Still respectful of the rules, but close enough that his words reached clearly. The guard frowned. "Hey!" But the billionaire lifted a hand, signaling the guard to stay quiet. He studied the man. The layers of worn clothes, the tired eyes, the rough hands, the gentle posture. The man looked like someone who had lived through many winters, many disappointments, many struggles. Not like someone who would know anything about a complex water pressure system. Still, something in the way he spoke made the billionaire pause. "You said you know what's wrong?" the billionaire asked, keeping his voice steady. The homeless man nodded once. "I think so. I heard the alarm earlier, and I heard the way the pipes were shaking." "You can tell from that?" a worker asked from behind, disbelief heavy in his voice. The man didn't look offended. He didn't react with pride or frustration. He simply answered, "When you've worked with machines for a long time, you can hear things others might not." Another worker whispered to a friend, "Worked with machines?" "Him." The billionaire ignored the whispers. Something about the man's tone sounded sincere, not confident, not arrogant, just quietly sure. "What exactly do you think is happening?" the billionaire asked. The man looked past him, toward the open entrance and the pipes inside. He took a slow breath, as though choosing his words carefully. "The pressure isn't rising because something's broken. It's rising because something's stuck. Something small, but in the worst possible place." "That's what we said," the engineer muttered, but the homeless man shook his head gently. "You're looking for the blockage in the wrong line." Every worker turned at those words. Even the billionaire felt a strange chill pass through him. Not from the cold, but from the calm certainty in the man's voice. The billionaire stepped closer. "How would you know that?" The man hesitated for the first time, glancing down at his shoes. Not out of fear, but out of humility. "I used to fix systems like these," he said quietly. "A long time ago." "A long time ago." The billionaire studied him again, this time with new eyes. The man didn't look like someone telling a story for attention. He wasn't asking to be let inside. He wasn't asking for money. He was simply offering information because he believed it mattered. "What do you suggest we check?" the billionaire asked. The man pointed toward the far side of the underground level. "There's a secondary release panel behind the main pipes. Most people don't notice it because it's built into the wall. If the smaller release valve inside that panel gets stuck, the pressure can't balance. It builds in the main line. It creates a vibration that sounds just like the one you have." The workers exchanged looks. "That panel is sealed off," one of them said. "It's not even part of today's inspection. That's why no one checked it," the man replied. The billionaire felt something shift inside him, a spark of hope he didn't want to fully trust yet. "Is the fix complicated?" The homeless man shook his head. "Not really. But it takes someone with hands small enough to reach inside, or someone who knows which part to loosen without breaking something else." The manager stepped forward. "And you know how to do that?" The man nodded. "If it's the same type of system, I think it is." "Yes." A silence spread across the entrance area. Workers looked at one another, some uncertain, some doubtful, some quietly hopeful. The billionaire looked at the man carefully. "What's your name?" The man lowered his eyes again. "People don't usually ask me that. Tonight, someone finally had." The billionaire repeated softly, "Your name?" The man answered almost shyly, "You can call me the mechanic. That's what they used to call me at work." The mechanic, it suited him more than any traditional name might have. It carried history, skill, experience, things no one would have guessed by looking at his worn clothes. The billionaire took a slow step forward, standing only a few feet from him now. "Would you be willing to take a look at the system?" The workers all froze. The mechanic blinked in surprise. "Me. Go inside." "Yes," the billionaire said. "If you truly think you know what the problem is, then we need your help." The mechanic looked uncertain for the first time, not because he doubted his skills, but because he wasn't used to being invited anywhere. His shoulders dropped slightly, as though the weight of years spent being unseen rested there. "I can try," he finally said. "But I don't want to get in anyone's way." "You won't be in the way," the billionaire assured him. "You'll be helping us." The guard stepped aside. The workers moved back. The mechanic hesitated another moment, then slowly stepped past the barrier. His worn shoes brushed against the concrete floor of the entrance, a place he never expected to be. Inside, the warmth from the temporary heaters touched his face. The air smelled like metal and wet concrete. The alarm continued its steady beeping. Workers watched him quietly, curiosity rising in their eyes. The billionaire walked beside him, guiding him toward the area where the pipes were trembling. "This is where the pressure is highest," he said. "Everyone thinks the blockage is somewhere around here." The mechanic crouched down without hesitation. His movements were slow but sure, as if his body remembered things his life had tried to make him forget. He placed a hand on one pipe, then another. His touch was gentle, careful. He closed his eyes and listened. The workers stared, confused. Listening to a pipe? Who does that? But the billionaire watched with growing interest. After a moment, the mechanic opened his eyes again. "It's exactly what I thought," he said quietly. "The vibration is coming from the other side of the wall." The billionaire nodded slowly. "The sealed panel," yes, the mechanic said. "It's stuck. Something small, maybe a loose piece of metal or a jammed lever. If someone can reach in and reset it, the pressure will drop right away." The manager scratched his head. "But that panel wasn't part of the blueprints we checked tonight." "Why would that be the problem?" "Because systems like these always have backup lines," the mechanic said. "Most people forget about them until something goes wrong." The billionaire looked at the workers. "Open the panel." They hesitated for only a second before grabbing tools and heading to the far wall. The billionaire and the mechanic followed behind, the alarm echoing louder as they neared the panel. It looked ordinary, just a flat section of wall with a small hinge. It's barely noticeable under the dust. The workers pried it open. Inside, behind a layer of pipes, sat a small release valve. It was jammed completely, just like the mechanic said. The workers stared in shock. The billionaire stared, too. The mechanic stepped forward, leaning closer. "I can fix it," he said softly. "If you'll let me." The billionaire nodded. "Go ahead." The mechanic slipped his hand into the narrow opening. His fingers moved with precision, adjusting the lines inside. Every worker watched, barely breathing. Then, after a few quiet seconds, the mechanic whispered almost. He pushed gently. A soft click echoed. The alarm stopped. The pipes stopped shaking the pressure. Reading on the monitors dropped fast. The entire room went silent. The billionaire exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The mechanic pulled his hand back slowly, looking almost embarrassed from all the attention. "I told you," he said quietly, not with pride, but with simple relief. It was just stuck. For a moment, no one moved. The room was still almost too quiet after all the noise that had filled it earlier. The sudden silence felt strange, like the whole building had taken a deep breath and finally relaxed. Workers stared at the mechanic with disbelief written across their faces. The billionaire looked at the pressure readings again, just to make sure he wasn't imagining things he wasn't. The numbers were steady, safe. The worst was over. The billionaire let out a slow breath, didn't even know he'd been holding. The tension in his shoulders loosened. It was strange, this man in worn clothing, this stranger who had stepped into the building only minutes earlier, had done what trained professionals couldn't. The mechanic stepped back from the panel, brushing dust from his hands. He didn't smile or act proud. Instead, he looked almost unsure of what to do next. His eyes shifted from the valve to the billionaire, then to the workers who still stared at him. One of the engineers finally broke the silence. "How? How did you do that so fast?" The mechanic shrugged lightly. "Once you've worked with these systems for a long time, you learn to notice the small things. The sound it makes, the way the pipe shakes. It tells you a story." The manager rubbed the back of his neck. "I've been working on projects like this for 15 years. I've never seen anyone fix something that quickly." The mechanic lowered his eyes. "I just did what I used to do every day." The billionaire stepped forward. "Used to?" The mechanic hesitated. It was only for a moment, but the hesitation carried years of weight, years of silence. Years of living in the background, years of being someone no one paid attention to. Finally, he answered quietly, "I used to work in maintenance. Industrial plants. Big machines. Big systems. Lots of pressure lines." One of the workers blinked. "Seriously? You were a maintenance worker?" The mechanic nodded slowly. For more than 20 years, the workers exchanged looks, some surprised, some thoughtful, some suddenly embarrassed for having doubted him earlier. The billionaire studied the mechanic more closely now. The tired eyes, the careful movements, the way he spoke softly as if afraid of taking up too much space. It was becoming clear that the man wasn't simply guessing or getting lucky. He knew this work, not from reading about it, not from watching others. From doing it, the billionaire cleared his throat gently. "Would you mind stepping into the office area for a moment? I want to talk to you somewhere quieter." The mechanic blinked. "Me, yes," the billionaire said. "You." The mechanic nodded slowly. "If you want." As they walked away from the work area, the workers parted like a quiet wave, giving the mechanic space. Some patted him lightly on the shoulder as he passed. Others gave him small nods of respect. It was the first time in a long time that anyone had looked at him that way. They stepped into a small temporary office on the side of the construction site. The room was warm, lit by a single bright lamp and cluttered with papers, blueprints, and a few chairs. The billionaire gestured for the mechanic to sit. He didn't sit right away. He hesitated, as though he wasn't sure if he was allowed. But the billionaire gave him a small, reassuring nod. So he slowly lowered himself into the chair. The billionaire sat across from him. "You helped us tonight. More than you know." The mechanic looked down at his hands. "I'm glad I could do something." The billionaire leaned forward slightly. "I want to understand something. If you've got this skill, if you know how to fix things, most people can't. How did you end up living on the street?" The mechanic didn't answer right away. His eyes softened, and his fingers traced the outline of a scratch on the wooden table. For a long moment, he looked like someone standing between two memories, one good, one painful. "When the plant I worked at shut down," he began quietly, "they told us it was temporary, just for a few months. We all believed it. We waited. Every week they said the same thing. Next month. Just wait." He swallowed, his voice gentle but heavy. Months became years. By the time they closed it for good, I had nothing saved. I tried looking for other work, but I wasn't young anymore, and machines had changed. New technology? New systems. Companies didn't want someone my age. The billionaire listened in silence. The mechanic continued. I lost my apartment, then my car. After that, things just fell apart. One piece at a time. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, quiet, like watching your life drift away while you stand still. The billionaire's heart tightened. Something about the way the mechanic said it made it impossible to look away. I'm sorry, he said softly. The mechanic shook his head. Life happens. You don't always get to choose how it ends up. The billionaire leaned back, studying the man in front of him. The mechanic didn't complain. He didn't blame anyone. He didn't carry anger or bitterness, only acceptance and quiet strength. After a moment, the billionaire asked, How long have you been living on the street? A few years, the mechanic replied. I try to stay near warm places. This site has been one of them. The billionaire nodded slowly. And during all that time, no one knew you had this kind of skill? The mechanic smiled faintly, almost sadly. People don't usually ask. The billionaire felt those words hit deeper than expected. People don't usually ask? Not about the mechanic. Not about who he used to be. Not about what he knew. They just saw a homeless man and walked past. The billionaire looked at him with growing respect. Tonight, you saved us from a disaster. You saved the entire project. The mechanic shook his head lightly. I just fixed a stuck valve. No, the billionaire replied. You saw something no one else did. The mechanic glanced away. But the billionaire wasn't done. I want you to understand the impact of what you did. If that pipe had burst or the floor had flooded, we would have lost months of work. Maybe even the entire project. Hundreds of people would have been affected, and you stopped that from happening. The mechanic blinked, looking slightly overwhelmed. I didn't think about all that. I just heard the problem. The billionaire gave a small smile. Sometimes the ones who see the smallest details end up being the ones who save everything. Ain't for the first time since entering the building. The mechanic allowed himself a tiny smile. The billionaire took a breath, then asked gently, Do you have anywhere to stay tonight? The mechanic shook his head. Not really. I usually find a warm spot near the vents, or in a shelter if there's space. The billionaire nodded slowly. Would you let us arrange a room for you? Just for the night, at least. Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe. The mechanic looked stunned. You want to do that for me? You helped us, the billionaire said. It's the least we can do. The mechanic hesitated, unsure whether to accept. He wasn't used to kindness from strangers. He wasn't used to being offered anything at all. After a long moment, he nodded softly. If it's not too much trouble? It's no trouble, the billionaire assured him. They walked back out into the main work area. The workers turned toward them again, their faces brighter now that the danger had passed. As they approached, someone started clapping, then another and another. Soon the entire room filled with applause. The mechanic froze, eyes wide, as if he had stepped into a dream. He stood awkwardly, unsure what to do with his hands, unsure how to react. No one had clapped for him in years, maybe decades. The billionaire gave him a reassuring nod. They're clapping for you. The mechanic looked at the workers again. Their cheers weren't loud or wild. They were warm, respectful, honest. The mechanic swallowed hard, feeling something rise in his chest, something he thought he had lost a long time ago, belonging when the applause faded. The billionaire motioned for the driver standing outside. Take him somewhere comfortable for the night, he said. Make sure he has what he needs. The mechanic raised a hand gently. I don't need much. Just maybe a warm bed. I'll have that, the billionaire promised. The mechanic nodded, quietly grateful. But before he walked toward the car waiting outside, he turned back to the billionaire. His voice was soft, almost fragile. Thank you for listening to me. The billionaire gave him a small, sincere smile. Thank you for speaking up. The mechanic stood there for a moment, unsure if he should say more. Then he stepped toward the exit, moving slowly as if afraid the moment might disappear if he walked too fast. The night air met him again, but this time it didn't feel as cold. The workers watched him leave. The billionaire watched too, and none of them knew that tonight, this quiet, unexpected night, was only the beginning of a much bigger change. For the mechanic and for the billionaire, life had just taken a turn neither of them could have predicted. The noise inside the old workshop slowly faded as the evening settled in. The billionaire stood near the door, watching the man who had been living on the street only days ago move around the space with quiet confidence. The billionaire still felt a strange mix of confusion and admiration every time he looked at him. It didn't make sense how someone who had nothing, someone who had spent nights sleeping under broken roofs and cold sidewalks, could understand machinery and structure better than the experts he had hired, but he did. The billionaire didn't fully understand it yet, but he knew there was more to this man than what the streets had reduced him to. The man knelt near the stubborn machine that had caused so many delays. He studied the wires and gears with the same calm focus he used for everything. His hands were rough, scarred, and tired, yet steady. Somehow, he made everything he touched look simple. The billionaire crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. "You sure you don't want a break?" he asked quietly. The man shook his head once. "No, I just need a moment to think." He didn't say it with pride or arrogance. It was simply how he saw the situation. The machine wasn't the enemy. It just needed patience. And he had plenty. The billionaire walked toward him and crouched down nearby. "You really understand this stuff, don't you?" The man didn't look up at first. He studied a small section of wiring, gently adjusting a metal piece that had shifted out of place. "I understand what's in front of me," he finally said. "Machines break. People give up. That's all." The billionaire watched him closely. "So why didn't you fix things for a living before?" he asked softly. The man paused. For the first time that day, his hands froze. He didn't turn around. He didn't sigh. He didn't frown. But something in the air changed, like a cold wind passing through an open window. "It's a long story," he said quietly. The billionaire didn't push. He could see the barrier, even if the man tried to keep it invisible. Whatever happened to him wasn't small. It wasn't something he could discuss casually. It's like a memory of a place he once visited. After a moment, the man spoke again. "Let me finish this connection," he said. "Then I'll tell you what you want to know." The billionaire nodded and stepped back. He pretended to study the room, but he was really watching the man, trying to understand the rhythm of his mind. It amazed him how focused he could be, despite everything he wasn't saying. Many people struggled to work even when life was comfortable. Yet this man worked as if he had carried the weight of the world for years and didn't expect anyone to lift it for him. The repair took almost another hour. When he finally stood up, he wiped his hands on an old cloth and quietly tested the switch. A low hum spread through the workshop. The machine's inner lights flickered and glowed evenly. It was running. The billionaire felt a wave of relief and disbelief. Weeks of failures, countless attempts, and every expert giving up, solved by a man who had slept behind a grocery store. 2 nights ago, the billionaire stepped forward. "You did it." The man didn't smile. He didn't show pride. He simply nodded once, as if this were the result he expected all along. "I told you it wasn't broken," he said calmly. "Just misunderstood." The billionaire stared at him with a strange heaviness in his chest. "Misunderstood," he repeated. "Is that how you see things? Machines? People? Everything?" The man shrugged. "If something doesn't make sense, I try to understand it. It's all I can do." The billionaire nodded. He couldn't argue with that. But now he remembered the promise the man had said he would explain his past. He didn't want to force it. But he quietly asked, "And your story?" "You said you'd tell me." The man didn't sit down. Instead, he walked to the far corner of the workshop, placed one hand on the back of a dusty chair, and stared at the floor. It wasn't the kind of silence that demanded comfort. It was the kind that came before truth. After a long moment, he began to speak. "I used to work with machines all the time," he said. "Not this exact kind, but close. I had a job in a small engineering shop. Nothing big, nothing special, but it paid the bills. The billionaire listened quietly. The man continued. I liked the work. I understood it. It made sense, but life doesn't always stay steady. One thing goes wrong, then another, and suddenly the path you thought was simple becomes twisted. He paused before going on. Someone close to me got sick. I spent everything I had trying to help. Savings, time, work. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating right. I was running between hospital visits and my job until the owner said he couldn't keep me if I kept missing shifts. The billionaire's chest tightened. So you lost the job? Yes, and I didn't blame him. I understood. Businesses can't survive on sympathy. He exhaled slowly. The medical bills kept rising. I sold everything that wasn't essential, but it still wasn't enough. When things finally calmed, I thought I could restart from nothing. I tried to find work again. But everywhere I went, someone else had more experience, more energy, more stability. And I had. Well, just me. The billionaire spoke softly. That must have been hard. The man nodded. Hard isn't the right word. But I don't want to complain. Others have gone through worse. I just reached a point where I couldn't keep up with the world's pace anymore. One day of missed opportunity becomes 2, then 10. And before I knew it, I was on the street. People walked past like I wasn't there. Days turned into weeks. But I kept thinking, kept watching, kept learning from whatever I found around me. He finally turned to face the billionaire. So yes, I know machinery. I know how things work. But no one cared who I was anymore. They only saw someone who hadn't shaved, someone with worn clothes, someone who didn't belong anywhere. The billionaire didn't know what to say at first. It wasn't pity he felt. It was frustration at a world that let someone like this disappear. You deserved better, the billionaire said quietly. The man gave a small shake of his head. I don't need better. I just need a chance to stand again. That's all. The billionaire walked closer, stopping only a few steps away. He looked at the repaired machine, then at the man who had saved his entire project without asking for anything in return. You're not going back to the street, the billionaire said firmly. Not while I'm here. The man lifted his eyes slightly, as if unsure whether to believe the words. The billionaire continued. I'm not saying this out of charity. I'm saying it because you have skills, knowledge, and experience that most people never get. You saw solutions where the best experts failed. You helped me more than you realize. And I'm not going to let that go to waste. The man said nothing. I want you to work here, the billionaire said. Not as a helper or a temporary fix, as someone I trust. Someone who understands things that others don't. I'll pay you fairly. I'll get you whatever documents you need. You'll have a place to stay, real meals, and steady work. But more than any of that, he paused. I want you to feel like a human again. You deserve that. The man looked down, his jaw tightening slightly. It wasn't emotion he tried to hide, but disbelief. People didn't say things like this to him. Not anymore. Why me? He asked quietly. There are plenty of people who know more than I do, maybe, the billionaire said. But none of them were here. None of them cared enough to look deeper. None of them saw this machine the way you did. And none of them would have tried this hard after everything you've been through. The man stood still for a long time. The workshop seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he nodded. If you're sure, then I'll try. The billionaire almost smiled. I'm sure. But deep inside, the billionaire wasn't thinking about the machine anymore. He was thinking about the moment earlier when the man said he'd only needed someone to give him a chance, and he realized something important. Maybe the man had solved the billionaire's problem, but the billionaire had stumbled into something much larger, because now he felt responsible out of guilt. But out of respect for giving this man the one thing the world had taken away, a new beginning. The man walked back toward the machine, checking a few parts again, but this time his shoulders were lighter. Not relaxed, not carefree, but no longer carrying the full weight of loneliness he had carried. For so long, the billionaire watched him and felt a quiet sense of certainty settle inside him. This wasn't the end of there. story, it was only the beginning of something far more meaningful, something neither of them could have predicted. And tomorrow, they would face the next challenge together. The morning sun came in soft through the tall workshop windows, touching every corner of the room with a warm, calm light. The billionaire arrived earlier than usual, already feeling a different kind of energy inside the place. The last few days had changed the atmosphere completely. The machine that had caused endless stress was now working quietly, almost proudly, as if it knew it had been brought back to life. But what affected the billionaire even more was knowing that the man who had fixed it, someone the world had ignored, was now in the small guest room upstairs. Finally sleeping in a real bed, the billionaire moved quietly through the workshop, trying not to break the peaceful feeling. He picked up a few scattered papers, checked the updated readings of the repaired equipment, and then poured himself a simple cup of tea from the old kettle near the sink. As he took a slow sip, he heard light footsteps from the stairs. The man appeared in the doorway, wearing clean clothes the billionaire had left for him. They were a little big on him, but they fit well enough. He looked rested, still tired in the way someone who had lived too hard for too long might be, but rested in a way that made the billionaire feel strangely proud. "Morning, the billionaire," said. The man nodded slightly. "Morning." There was a quietness between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt natural-like to people easing into a new routine. The billionaire set his cup down. "How did you sleep?" The man took a moment to respond. "It felt strange," he admitted. "A roof, a door, a bed. It has been a long time." He looked around the workshop and added softly, "But good. I slept well." "Thank you." The billionaire nodded. "You don't have to thank me. You earned this." The man didn't argue, though he looked like he wanted to. He moved toward the machine he had repaired and checked it out of habit, running his fingers along the edges and listening to the soft hum. It was working exactly the way it should. After a moment, he looked back. "What do you need me to do today?" The billionaire smiled a little. "Actually, I want to talk to you first." The man stood still, waiting quietly. The billionaire took a deep breath. "I don't want you to think I'm just offering you a temporary place or short-term help. I want you to be part of this project, officially, permanently if you want. There's a position open. Here, maintenance and operations lead. I want you to have it." The man blinked slowly, as if trying to understand the weight of those words. "Lead?" he asked. "Yes," the billionaire said. "You'd be managing mechanical operations here. Repairs, improvements, oversight. It's a real job with real pay, real security, and real respect. You'd be working with me every day." The man stepped back a little. "I don't know. I've been out of the world for too long. I don't think anyone would take me seriously." "I take you seriously," the billionaire said firmly. The man looked at the floor. "But I don't look like someone who deserves a job like that." The billionaire crossed his arms. "You are the only one who solved a problem none of my experts could. That alone tells me you deserve this job more than anyone else I could hire. Skills matter, and you have them." The man stayed silent. The billionaire added softly, "Look, I know the world hasn't been kind to you, and I know it will take time before you feel comfortable again. But you are not less than anyone else. You're not a burden. You're not invisible. You're talented, sharp, and patient. Those things matter to me, and to this company." The man finally looked up, and there was a faint uncertainty in his eyes. "If I say yes, what happens then?" "Then," the billionaire said gently, "your life begins again." The man let out a slow breath, and after what felt like the longest pause, he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll try." The billionaire smiled in a way he hadn't in weeks. "Good, then let's start." The next few hours were different from anything the man had experienced in a long time. The billionaire sat beside him, explaining the larger vision of the project, not just machines, but the entire idea behind them. Plans for expansion, new partnerships, and the potential for growth. The man listened carefully, absorbing everything. Though he said very little, the billionaire could tell he understood far more than he showed. Eventually, a small group of employees arrived, engineers, assistants, and team members. They all stopped when they saw the man standing beside the billionaire. One of them whispered, "Is that the guy from outside?" The billionaire stepped forward before anyone could say something insensitive. "This is the new operations lead," he announced calmly. "He repaired the system none of you could figure out. He'll be guiding the mechanical side of this place from now on." The room fell into a stunned silence, but no one questioned it. The billionaire's word carried weight. The repaired machine standing behind them was proof enough. The man stood still, unsure how to react. But the billionaire placed a hand lightly on his shoulder and guided him toward the main control area. "Show them what you explained to me," the billionaire said kindly. The man hesitated, then stepped forward. He pointed to a part of the display. "The error wasn't coming from the core unit," he said calmly. "It was coming from the sensor panel. The signal was bouncing, so the machine kept shutting down to protect itself. If we stabilize this part, it will last much longer." The team leaned in, listening closely. One of the engineers nodded slowly. "He's right. That makes sense." Another added, "We didn't even think to check that." The man stepped back, uncomfortable with the attention. But the billionaire quietly reassured him with a nod, for the first time in a very long time. The man felt something he thought he had lost forever, belonging over the next few days. Everything changed, not just for the billionaire's project, but for the man himself. He settled into the guest room upstairs, keeping it simple but clean. The billionaire encouraged him to buy new clothes, but he took only what he needed. He was quiet but observant, respectful but confident in his work. Every day he arrived early at the workshop, sometimes even before the billionaire. He checked each machine, made notes, and occasionally made improvements without being asked. And every day, the billionaire found himself looking forward to working beside him. One evening, after a long day of repairs and tests, the billionaire sat beside him on the staircase outside the workshop. The air was cool and the sky was slowly turning orange. The billionaire said gently, "Your life doesn't have to stay limited to this place. You can grow here, learn more, lead bigger teams, maybe even build something of your own one day." Right. The man shook his head lightly. "I don't need more than this. I just need to feel human again." The billionaire smiled softly. "You already are. More than most people I've met." The man didn't answer. But the expression on his face showed that something inside him had shifted. A tiny spark of hope. Weeks passed, and the workshop became a different world entirely. The once troubled machines were now running smoothly. The team respected the man deeply, even turning to him when something didn't make sense. They no longer saw him as the person he used to be on the street. They saw him for what he always had been, as skilled. An intelligent human being who simply needed someone to believe in him. One morning, the billionaire called him into the office. "We have something important to handle today," he said. The man raised an eyebrow. "Another repair?" The billionaire smiled. "No, something bigger." He handed the man a document, a clean, official employment contract with his name printed clearly at the top. The man stared at it. Stunned, "This makes it official," the billionaire said. "You're not temporary. You're not a helper. You're not someone I'm just giving a room to. You're a permanent part of this place, with full benefits, full pay, and full respect." The man swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "Just say yes," the billionaire replied softly. The man sat down, took a shaky breath, and slowly signed the paper. The billionaire reached out and shook his hand firmly. "Welcome to the team." For a moment, the man couldn't speak. His eyes lowered, and he blinked several times to steady himself. "Thank you," he finally said, "for seeing me." The billionaire's voice softened. "Everyone deserves to be seen." Later that day, after the team had gone home, the man stayed behind for a moment. Standing alone in the quiet workshop, he looked around the place not with fear or doubt, but with a deep, calm sense of belonging. He wasn't the man the world had ignored anymore. He was part of something. He had value. He had a future. And as he stepped forward to turn off the lights, he whispered to himself, "I know what to do. Because now." For the first time in a very long time, He wasn't helpless. He was home.